Hi, Leonora. Thanks for joining me today. It's so good to see you again and talk to you. Tell us a little bit about the major areas that you're into. I know you're into brain health, longevity, memory, all these types of things, but tell us a little bit more about your areas of expertise and how you help people.
Yes, absolutely. So I began my career over 30 years ago as a physician in the UK. So I did like 3 years of hospital medicine, and then I became a general practitioner, and then I moved into public health. And I loved public health because it was about helping populations of people rather than just working with people one-on-one. It was about preventing illness. It was about community projects that could improve health. And then I had my two kids. I have two young adult sons, and they were both very sick as infants. So I took a career break from medicine, which was a hard thing to do because, you know, it's one of those careers that's all consuming. And during that time, I retrained to be a coach. And so since then, off and on, I have been a life coach. I began working with parents of what was called special needs children back then. So children with autism, learning difficulties, developmental delay, all that type of thing. So I coached those parents. And then I got the opportunity to go back to medicine as a developmental pediatrician. And so I did that for a couple of years. And it was then that I really developed my passion for brain health. I got to see firsthand that everybody's brain was incredibly different. And of course, the special needs neurodiverse children that I was working with, their brains were, you know, even more unique than neurotypical children's brains. So it was really fascinating, and it really got me into understanding more of how the brain works and how it works with other systems in the body. Then I moved to the States and couldn't work here as a doctor without considerable retraining. And so I picked up coaching again and combined it with I used to do a therapy called neurofeedback. So I was looking at people's brainwave activity in real time, and I can kind of see what was changing brainwave activity, which was really cool. And so again, dove even more into brain health. And it was really cool. For example, I'm a scientist effectively by background. And my supervisor one day, I had a couple of severely autistic kids, and the neurofeedback wasn't working. And this is an expensive therapy, so it bothered me that it wasn't working. And she said, well, have you taught the kids to meditate yet? And I was like, I'm a doctor and a scientist. Why would I teach them to meditate? And she said to me, go and read the research. And this was 15 years ago. And there was an emerging body of research that showed neurofeedback had profound effects, that meditation had profound effects on well-being and also on the brain. And so I started teaching everybody that I worked with how to do meditation, and you could see it working in real time. And it was like watching a magic wand within 2 minutes of doing mindfulness practice. And some of the people I was working with were severely autistic, non-verbal children. These kids couldn't speak, and I could see that meditation was profoundly affecting their brain. It was so cool to see it.
So when they can't, with those particular children, when they
Yes.
can't speak, but they can understand your instructions on,
Yes.
sit down, like breathe, like how to meditate, they could understand the instructions?
Yeah.
Okay. And then what sort of sensors are you putting or attaching them to measure the
Yeah.
brain?
So, this was a while ago. It's really cool. The neurofeedback equipment is much more sophisticated and a lot less messy than it used to be. We used to have to attach this big cap with gel all over, and people used to walk out with like big clumps of gel, in their hair back then. And so it came from EEG, electroencephalogram, which is how you diagnose people with epilepsy. So you're looking at brainwave activity. And they found that, when you looked at people who weren't epileptic, you could see their brainwave activity and you could spot patterns. And you could see, for example, in an anxious person, that certain parts of the brain were chronically working too hard. And then you might see with, for example, I work a lot with people with ADHD. People with ADHD, the prefrontal cortex, which is the higher functioning part of the brain that does all the, the planning and the organizing and the being tidy and all of that kind of stuff. They have a very under-aroused, quiet part, frontal lobes. And under stress, it almost completely shuts down. So it was really cool to see all of that. However, I have ADHD myself, and the therapy is really boring to deliver. And so that's long story short. That's why I stopped doing neurofeedback therapy. I also became a little bit concerned that you could do almost the same by just teaching mindfulness practice.
And so what's your mindfulness practice protocol, or what's the meditation steps or protocol that you teach your clients?
Great question. I believe that there is a meditation for everybody, but you have to research and you have to try out different types of meditation to find what works for you. For example, like I was talking about, somebody with ADHD might not be able to do a meditation that just focused on the breath or that asked you to just quiet your mind because their mind is so busy. And so, you get them to try and do that and they just think they're terrible at it and they give up. Whereas there's a really cool tactile mindfulness practice that I teach almost all of my clients. And that is great for people with ADHD because you're kind of engaging more of the brain and it's a bit more interesting. So long story short, I think it depends on the person, but I think the research is unequivocal now that meditation mindfulness practice is good for everybody, and it's good for brain health, it's good for the health of the whole body, it's good for relationships, it's good for focus. And so I'm a big believer everyone should attempt to have some mindfulness practice in their daily routine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And how does someone tell if the meditation practice is helping them? Is it just like kind of like anecdotal, like, hey, I feel like I'm doing better this week? Or how is that tracked? Or like, how do you tell you're doing better at meditating?
Absolutely. And that's interesting because that's where the neurofeedback did help. Because the neurofeedback showed you in real time. And I would often have people, especially with ADHD, say to me, this is what focus feels like. They would be getting the reward from the neurofeedback. And people had told them all their lives, you need to focus. But they didn't really know what that meant. And all of a sudden you were telling them, you're focusing now. Do more of that. And so the neurofeedback was very, very useful for that. The cool thing today is there's lots of other devices that you can use. One of my favorites is HeartMath, it's a heart rate variability machine that you can get that attaches to your phone. And it's like, I don't know, it's like $150 or something like that. And heart rate variability is very closely related to the state of the nervous system. So if you want a device, there's some cool devices that you can use today. But like you said, for a lot of people, it's just anecdotal. It's feeling better afterwards. It's noticing the little things. I didn't get, so upset when I was stuck in traffic, or, finding moments in the day to actually put the mindfulness practice into practice. I know, Alex, you're into acting, and for a lot of people who are in the performing arts, anxiety is a really big problem. So if you can find a mindfulness practice that gives you a healthy level of anxiety rather than, it's good to be a little bit stressed, isn't it? It's good to kind of be ready and be excited, but you just don't want it to be at too high a level. So I think I'm a big believer that mindfulness practice isn't just for the practice, it's to help you in everyday life.
Yes, and for me personally, the mindfulness has translated more into this type of like body awareness for
Yeah.
me personally, and noticing when maybe the anxiety is bubbling up or the anger is bubbling up, and saying, "Okay, I've seen this, I've felt this before, I know where this is going, and I can decide that I want to nip it in the bud here and focus on something else, or focus on my breathing, or do some more breathing." So
Yes.
all this to say, like, the mindfulness is actually for me has been body awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really huge. I teach a course in stress management, and in that I talk about increased awareness is the first place that you have to start, because stress doesn't just, most of the time stress doesn't happen just like that. It builds slowly, and I call it the point of no return. That there's a point at which your nervous system is so agitated that you can't really do anything about it. You're so upset, you're so stressed out that you just have to kind of ride the storm, as it were. But before that, there's this window of opportunity where, if you do mindfulness practice, or if you go for a walk, or you do something that that is, in your toolkit for managing stress, that you can actually prevent the stress from getting too bad. And so, an awful lot of people are unaware, because they're so busy, of how their body is feeling. And so you're so right, it begins with awareness, and then knowing, I have some power now that I've become aware. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I've started a meditation practice, just very, very minimal, 15 minutes right after I wake up in the morning.
Great.
I've probably been doing consistently now for a month and a half, 2 months.
Brilliant.
And I've noticed one of the trends so far has been that in the beginning, when I first started, it takes maybe like 5 to 7 minutes for the mind to actually calm down. Because in the beginning, my mind's like kind of thinking about a lot of things. And then after 5 to 7 minutes, it's more calm and can finally get into more of that meditative state. For a lot of like high performers, or CEOs or leaders that come to you for as your clients, they're in stressful situations where they're responsible for teams, responsible for a ton of people under them. What are the patterns that you see, and how do you help, like high performers?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. Again, like we're talking about, it does begin with an awareness. Awareness is the first thing. I think it's also really important to be aware of what triggers you to get stressed. And by the way, I should preface that by saying anything you do when you're in a stressed state will not be as good as if you did it in a calm, clear-headed, rational state, because stress, acute or chronic stress, is really bad for your brain. It makes your brain malfunction. And so for people in leadership or high stress situations, for example, I used to be a doctor and used to respond very quickly to a change in circumstances. And so, stress is a huge problem, and is probably the cause of a lot of bad business decisions, or, communication errors, people having conflict, that type of thing. So it is really, really important. So awareness is... Go on, yeah.
Yeah. What's the difference between chronic stress and the type of stress where it's that it gets you into the flow state, where it's just kind of the enough amount of stress that challenges your skill level where you can get into a flow state, versus chronic stress? And how do you tell which one you have?
That's a very good question. We are meant to get stressed. It's part of our survival mechanism in our body. There are some people who have abnormally low levels of stress, and they tend to die young because they're not alert to danger as much. They tend to be adrenaline junkies. I don't know if you saw at the weekend, there was this guy who climbed this tower in Taipei that without any ropes
Yes,
and,
Alex Honnold.
yeah, so, he probably is somebody who is pretty immune to stress. Like what normally stresses a human being isn't really stressing him. And a lot of climbers and people like that, they die young. I have a friend who's an anaesthetist, and they're really into extreme sports, kind of whitewater kayaking and climbing and things like that. And they've had several friends who've died young from accidents that, in situations that you and I wouldn't put ourselves in because of stress and, anxiety. So anxiety is important. It is part of how we stay safe. And it is meant, when it occurs, it's meant to be triggered by something that warrants anxiety and stress. And, our nervous system is still wired exactly the same, almost exactly the same as when we were cave people. And back then, our lives had different stresses. It was the saber-toothed tiger that might kill you. It was, poisonous mushrooms. It was the fact that your campfire might get out of hand and burn down your shelter. And there was kind of all these like real life-threatening dangers that we needed to pay attention to. So today, in this modern world, we still have a nervous system that's wired like that. And so it's meant to respond to things that warrant stress. But today we're getting stressed by, an annoying email. we're getting stressed by things that really aren't life-threatening, but they feel really real to us. And I never did, when anybody says something stresses them, I never tell them that they're wrong, because it's in the eye of the beholder. If you think you are stressed, you are stressed. That thing is stressing you out. Being able to kind of identify what things stress you so that you can be ready. So say it's going on stage that stresses you, then you prepare for that. And Alex, as you know, I used to work for Tony Robbins as one of his coaches and business trainers. And one of the best things I learned from Tony was about peak state, how to get into a peak state. And a peak state is the opposite of a stress state. And so it's being able to kind of master your body, your physiology, your mindset, what you're focusing on, your breathing, all that kind of stuff. And that peak state work, when I work with a lot of executives, I always teach them how to get into a peak state, because it's a really good antidote to stress. Makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Sometimes the stress can be for something that's not happening imminently, but something that's gonna be down the road. Like, maybe it's a medical operation or taxes or bills or like a big test or something like that, or something like that. How would you coach a client to manage that type of stress? And typically that stress is probably focused on what the person cannot control, right? Like things out of my control that for some reason my brain is focusing on, that's causing these feelings.
Yes.
Is it just a matter of like changing your focus, or like what are some things that someone can do?
Yeah, so that's, in part mindset work. That's about, that's about challenging patterns of thinking that you're having that are not helpful. When we're worrying about something that is in the future that may not even happen, it's a complete waste of our energy. Like save that energy for when something actually does happen. And so, if people are having recurring patterns of thinking that are causing, high levels of stress, and by the way, I raise my hand here, I suffered from severe chronic stress for probably over 10 years, and a lot of it was about stuff that wasn't even happening at the time. Some of it was stuff that was happening, my kids were sick, and that was genuinely stressful. But some of it was like worrying about what's going to happen when my kids turn 18 and things like that. It's like, 10 years of worrying about something that you had no idea how it was going to turn out. I think, when you, as a coach, you have conversations with people and you challenge them I love teaching the neuroscience of things, because then people start to kind of realize it's just my biology that's causing this problem and it's not helping me. And because I have a rational mind, I can learn to override the biology. Does that make sense? So with tools like mindfulness practice, getting into a peak state, things like that, you can harness that biology and prevent it from harming you.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So these days, what other things are you into or are you using in your coaching?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a shift fairly recently. So I've been into brain health for probably into brain health coaching for the last 4 years. I did some training with Daniel Amen. I became one of his coaches and trainers. I'm really passionate about helping everybody realize that you've got to fall in love with your brain. It is £2 organ. It's a shame I have a little brain upstairs, but I forgot to bring it down. It's only £2 in weight. It's like 2 to 3% of your body weight, and yet it is the operating system for pretty much everything. I mean, there's other things involved. Your heart, all the organs in your body are involved, but your brain is the master operating system. And if it is unhealthy, everything is harder. It's harder to be well, it's harder to perform, it's harder to have good relationships. And so everybody needs to fall in love with their brain today. And when I was a doctor working in hospitals, there were a few illnesses that really scared me. And I was like, I really want to prevent those as I get older. Cancer's an obvious one. Of course, cancer's a horrible, horrible thing. But the thing that really bothered me most about getting older was dementia. And, I worked for 6 months in a care of the elderly hospital. So we had a lot of people with dementia who were sometimes spending years losing their mind effectively and losing their independence and having this horrible, often very slow decline and becoming a different person. And it was hard for the patient, but it was even harder for their family sometimes. And so the really interesting thing, back then, I don't know, this was like 30 years ago, I don't know that we knew what we know now. And that is, dementia is a disease of middle age that doesn't show up until you're older. So the processes that will lead to you getting dementia or Alzheimer's or vascular dementia, which is like mini strokes, it doesn't start in your 70s. It starts in your 40s and 50s.
And so how did they make that connection, and what are those connections? What are the signs of that they found?
Yeah. And I mean, it's been, an increasing body of research. Things like inflammation in the body, diabetes, heart disease, any chronic illness increases your risk of getting dementia. Because like I said, your brain is the operating system for everything. And also, your brain is really affected by the health of your body. So if your kidneys are unhealthy, then your brain's going to be unhealthy. If your heart's unhealthy, your brain is going to be unhealthy. So it's all connected. And we used to see all the body parts, all the systems and organs as kind of separate, which is why we have these specialists. We have heart specialists, we have lung specialists. And of course now, I'm sure you and your audience are aware, there's this emerging field of medicine, which is integrative medicine or lifestyle medicine, that we didn't have 30 years ago, that is recognizing we have to see people as a whole. And, preventing, there's probably about 20% of dementia that we can't prevent. that is, that it's inevitable because of genetic factors. But more than 80%, and it's probably more like 95%, is reducible or preventable by lifestyle change. Isn't that amazing?
So what are the like top 3 or 5 things that
Yeah.
you would recommend someone who's maybe in the middle age that's, prime time to try and prevent that?
Absolutely. Really good question. The top 2, and they kind of fight for top place, is diet and exercise. And some doctors say exercise is more important, some say diet is more important. I think they kind of go hand in hand. If you're eating inflammatory foods, then you're going to have inflammation in your body and you're going to have inflammation in your brain, and that's going to dramatically increase your risk of dementia. Exercise is equally important. It improves blood flow to your brain. It floods your brain with really good neurochemicals, which are, good for long-term brain health. I think it was about 8 years ago, people really started talking about something called brain-derived neurotropic factor. And it's a cool chemical that is released from your muscles when you exercise that makes your brain able to learn new things. So it's like I'm trying to think of the word for, it's like fertilizer for your brain. And so, like, when you exercise, your brain is primed to learn for a couple of hours afterwards.
Isn't that cool? Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you're wanting to learn some lines for a play that you're in, if any of your listeners are students or whatever, the best time to learn is, you want to cool down a little bit, but it's like 30 to 90 minutes after you've exercised.
That's very interesting, because sometimes when I am trying to memorize something, I'll go on a walk with the thing in front of me, and as my body's moving, I'll read out or I'll try and memorize that way. And that's, I found, has helped me, is not to just sit down in a stationary place, but to get the body moving and the blood moving as I'm trying to like learn something or memorize something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's funny, as students, I look back, we were extremely sedentary. When I was a medical student, we would sit for like 8 hours in the library and barely move. We'd go to the bathroom and that would be it. It was so bad for us. Diet and exercise, like I say, they go hand in hand. It's funny, I have something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so I have lax joints throughout my body, and my soft tissue doesn't heal as well as it does in other people. And so I have to be really careful with exercise. I can't do as intense exercise as a lot of other people my age. So with both diet and exercise, it has to be customized to you. You are a completely unique human being in a completely unique body and brain. And so what I say to everybody that I work with, you have to become a detective and a scientist. The detective part is the self-awareness piece that you were talking about. It's looking for clues. If you eat some food and 2 hours later you have a terrible headache and you need to have a nap, it's highly likely that food wasn't very good for you. So that's the kind of detective part. Look for clues. If I do this, it's funny, years ago, I was using, I'm trying to think of the name of the machine. It was one of the exercise machines in the gym that was really popular. It's like a ski machine. And I developed this horrendous back pain. And it turned out it was this machine that was causing it. There's a cross trainer or something like that. And it was because when I was on it, my gait was too wide for my hips, and because I have back problems anyway, and I thought I was doing the right thing because I was exercising and I was doing 45 minutes, but I was doing 45 minutes of exercise that was bad for me. It was maybe good for my heart, but it was really bad for my back. And the same with food. So, you want to be listening out to this. Your body's really smart. It sends you signals to tell you if something is wrong. But the problem is we're often so busy we don't listen to the signals. Does that make sense?
Yes. And what I've realized too is that our bodies are different. Like there's foods that I can eat that, or foods that, maybe a family member can eat. But when I eat those same foods, it's not good for me at all.
Yeah.
For me, it's spicy foods. So yeah, you're totally right on that. Through your coaching with your clients, are there any stories of transformation or great progress that you've seen where you're like, wow, this modality really helped this client, or this client made tremendous progress in their lives, and this is what the situation they're in? Like, are there any great stories like that you can share?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I've had clients that have said, the work that we've done together has totally changed their life. And, that if you have a good relationship in coaching, it's frequent for that to happen. It's hard to be a human being, and it's hard to do it alone. And I think what I love about coaching is you're a bit like the analogy of sports coaching. You're kind of on the sidelines seeing what the person can't see for themselves because they're in the game. They're too close to it. So, I've had people I just had a call earlier on today with a client who's a senior executive in a marketing company. And I've been working with her for 5 years. She used to be so anxious. We did 2 years of coaching on stress management and anxiety, and she'd be overthinking something, she'd be anxious about something. And the call we had today, during the call, I was like, this is a totally different person I'm working with here. Her company's had a lot of changes in the last 12 months, and she's like, I've realized that there's so many things I can't control, and so now I just focus on what I can control. Like, hallelujah, it's like, I must have told her that, 30, 40 times, and she's putting it into practice now. So, there's a lot of stories like that. And she's going into this year excited about the year ahead. She feels in control of her stress. She's kind of saying, whatever comes along, I'm going to be fine. And she's just a totally different person. So that's fresh in my mind.
It's so good to hear that. And what a great piece of wisdom, just to focus on things that you can control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it was very interesting coaching during COVID, because it was like this international experiment of stressing everybody out all at once. And, I remember I had 2 days at the beginning of COVID, 2 separate days when I totally lost it. The situation freaked me out. And even with all of my coaching strategies and mindfulness, all the tools I have, I could not cope with it. And I had 2 separate days where I just cried. And I was like, the world is ending. I'm going to die. My family's going to die. I just couldn't get out of it. And it's okay to have occasional, and I woke up the next morning, I'm like, I'm not having another day like that. And, put all my tools into practice. And, I think with coaching tools and brain health tools and things like that, sometimes you get an aha moment where there's a massive change that happens kind of in an instant. And I've had that with coaching. I did Tony Robbins' Date with Destiny in December, and I had an aha moment, and I'll share it with you. I had been falling back into my old negative patterns of thinking, and I had developed what Tony Robbins calls a primary question that was, what is wrong with me? And I would say it to myself 10 times a day, if not more. And it also came with it was, what's wrong with you? Like, why, I was getting annoyed with people. And what's wrong with the world? Like, why is the world like this? Why can't the world be different? And it was an old pattern from many, many years ago, and I was sliding back into it.
Right. And the quality of your questions is the quality of your life. So then your
Totally.
brain was
Yeah.
this radar that was constantly trying to find what was wrong, either in
Yes,
yourself or other people or in the world,
exactly.
and not seeing the other things that were out there or in yourself.
Yeah. I mean, and I, if you want to find what's bad in the world, watch the news for 5 minutes. It will give you 100 bad news stories that you can focus on if you want to focus on something bad. And it was like a slap in the face during Date with Destiny. I'm like, my God, how have I allowed myself to get back into that? And here's the problem with many things like this. It's a slow onset. It's kind of this insidious background onset that you don't realize it's happening. And it's a similar thing with health as well.
Unless you have a coach like you
Exactly,
who's
exactly.
saying, "Hey, Alex, have you noticed over the past couple weeks or
Yeah,
past months you've been sliding back into your old
exactly.
pattern?"
And you're so right. I think that it's one of the really useful things about coaching, because you can't see, because you're in the game, you can't see those changes that are happening. And sometimes with clients, I'll kind of notice they are sounding more and more down every call, or they're more and more angry, or this pattern is showing up, and they are completely unaware of it because it's been this slow thing. And yet I'm able to see it because I'm coaching with them regularly, and I listen carefully as well, and I'm listening for changes like that. So and if I can just share,
Yes.
I changed my primary question.
Yeah. So, what's your new primary
I
question?
know, and I love it. I'm actually thinking about having a t-shirt made with it on. It's the simplest question of all. What is good?
I love that.
And I wake up in the morning now and I say, what is good? And if I find myself getting grumpy, which my family will tell you I'm pretty grumpy, if I find myself doing that, and I have the self-awareness to catch myself, I'm like, what is good? And when, like you said, when you start looking for it, so many good things if you go out and look for them.
I had a similar one.
Yeah,
And the question that I developed over the past 3 to 4 years is, what can I celebrate?
I love that.
And in the beginning, Leonora, it was so hard for me to answer that question. Literally, I would sit there and I'd be a blank for what I could celebrate. Nothing would come out of my mouth for 2 to 3 minutes in the
Yeah,
beginning.
yeah.
But over time, as I started practicing answering that question, I started finding so many things that I could celebrate, like little small things. Like I realized,
Mm,
I think the rule that I had before was that I couldn't celebrate unless it was like a monumental achievement or
mm,
something, right?
yeah,
And then what I learned over time was that I don't have to wait for something big to celebrate. I can celebrate small things like it's a
yeah.
sunny day today, or I just saw, this nature outside. It could be small things.
Exactly. I love that so much. And you're so right. I read a really great book when I started getting into neuroscience and mindfulness, called Buddha's Brain. And the subheading was something like the neuroscience of mindfulness practice or something like that. And it's quite an old book. I must have read it, I don't know, 12 plus years ago. And there was a quote in it, and it said, when good things happen in your life, it's like being at a banquet. Don't just look at it, dig in. And when we start to kind of collect those little things, then there's all this goodness there that you could easily just ignore and walk past. But if you collect it, it just becomes this big pile of wonderful, wonderful things to celebrate. And that's backed up by the research on well-being. There's a great book that was written called Flourish. Martin Seligman is the father of positive psychology, and his research looked at why some people flourish and thrive after a terrible event and why other people develop PTSD. And about a quarter develop PTSD, a quarter thrive, and then the people in the middle, they just go back to the way they were before. They have a period of suffering and then they return to normal for them. And And so one of the things is about accomplishment. There were 5 things that he identified that kind of were the difference between these 2 extreme groups. And what they found was that when people experience a big accomplishment, winning a medal, finishing a marathon, going to the moon, that type of thing, the big, big things, they sometimes had a temporary improvement in well-being, followed by a crash in well-being. Whereas if you celebrate the small accomplishments, if you enjoy the journey of putting in the effort, of doing the work, showing up every day, that creates lasting well-being. And I just loved it when I heard that. It makes total sense. And I've had clients, I had 2 clients in a 1 week period that both got big promotions and massive pay rises. And they were both miserable afterwards. And I was like, but we've been working on this together for a year to get you this promotion. And they just felt hollow when they got it, and what a missed opportunity. And clearly I'd missed an opportunity to show them how to enjoy the journey. But it really fascinated me that, sometimes we can get all the things that we want and then we're still not happy. Just fascinating.
So how does that happen? Well, first on the celebrating, I think we aren't taught, or society tends to celebrate us after we've done something. Like, you've got the medal, you've done this, okay, we're going to clap for you now. It's not there with you when you're training at 5 a.m. in the dirt, no one's around, and you're by yourself. Like, that has to be learned almost on your own, or with a coach like you saying, hey, let's celebrate the effort that you've put into it, having that growth mindset. But what is it about, for example, those 2 clients who they've probably said, like, these promotions are what I want, like they verbalized that to you, but actually when it happened, the truth physiologically was that it wasn't really that great for them, or maybe it wasn't bringing them fulfillment. Like, what is it that our mind tricks us into thinking that this object or this thing is going to fulfill us? And basically I'm asking is, like, how do we prevent that from happening, where we can get aligned at the beginning of the race instead of like having to get to the end and then realize, like, what was I running this race for this whole time?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, sometimes it can begin in the planning process of doing something big. And by the way, I've just realized on the video, I've got this turret sticking out the top of my head. It just started distracting me. So say you're planning to run a marathon or something. It's really important at the beginning. Alex, I don't know if you ever did the RMP that Tony Robbins uses, the rapid planning method. And so it's a way of planning almost anything, but it's really good for planning big things. And so you say, what is the result that I want? Okay. And you get really specific about that. I want to run a marathon in, under 4 hours or whatever. And you have a date for it. You then want to think about why you want to do it. And you write that down, or you do it with your coach. You go through that process of, like, why? Why do you want to do it? Like, it's hard work training to do a marathon. And so you think about why, and then you time travel to the future. You imagine how you will feel. How will you feel when you accomplish it, when you run the marathon, when you get the promotion, whatever? What will it mean to you to achieve the goal? And who will you become in the process? And so you're kind of bringing that future. And by the way, accomplishment, the pleasure that we get from accomplishment is really about dopamine, this neurochemical that drives us and motivates us and kind of gives you a rush type of thing. It's why people get addicted. It's all about dopamine. And so when we bring the future to now, we get some dopamine from it now. And so when you're doing the training, you keep reminding yourself, this is going to feel great to finish the marathon. But you want to feel that every day, not just when you get to the end. So that's one of the things that you can do to prevent it, is like from the beginning, get really aligned with like why and how you're going to feel, and then remind yourself of that frequently. Like on the mornings when you're getting up for a run and it's cold or raining outside, you're like, this is going to be worth it at the end of the day. And that you're getting dopamine just thinking about it.
I love that you brought that up, that future state or future self scenario.
Yeah.
And it just gave me an idea that you can, like you said, you can build that into your training process or protocol, 5 minutes before the warm up or the training starts. Let's get into that future state and then start off the workout or start off the whatever work session that you're going to be doing in that state instead of, I mean, I followed into this too, where typically I might just sit down on my desk and start working without doing any of that mental preparation where I'm getting those good feelings and getting into that state before I start my work. And then if I just, get on the hamster wheel and just go through my normal routine without doing something like that protocol.
Yes.
At the end of that work session, I'm like, well, one, I didn't really feel that great. And two, maybe the productivity wasn't really there because of my state. It wasn't really optimal.
And I don't know if you remember, Tony Robbins has this thing called priming, and it's quite long. It's like a 12-minute process of doing a bit of kind of what we just said. I made a video. I coach at the moment for a dyslexia company, so I coach parents of children with dyslexia. And I made this video for the kids. Some of the kids are like having to do this training to help them overcome dyslexia. They're doing it every day. And some of these kids hate doing it. It's like they're dyslexic. Reading and writing and spelling is really hard for them. And none of us want to do something that's really hard for us. So I created this video called Brain Priming. And I do it sometimes. If I'm feeling like I'm struggling going into the workday, I do it. And I should do it every day because it's so effective. And if Alex, if you want to check it out, and if your viewers want to check it out, if you look me up on YouTube, and it's called Brain Priming. So most people don't have 10 minutes, so it's 5 minutes, 5 minutes long, and you definitely can't get a kid to do 12 minutes of priming. So you do a tactile mindfulness practice to just calm yourself down. That's for like 90 seconds. And then you stand up and you get in like a Superman pose and you punch across the midline while you say a mantra that has been researched a lot from Emile Coué. And it goes like this: every day in every way, I'm getting better and better. Yes. And so you repeat that 5 times. And by the end of doing that 5 times, you feel not only have you got the blood flowing by doing a little bit of movement, but you've also anchored this positive mindset in before you sit down to do the work. And so give it a try. I find it, like I say, I forget to do it most days, but the days I do it, it's really, really powerful. Why not get your body and your brain ready to do the work? It'll be more fun. You'll be more productive, you'll be less stressed, and everything, you'll get a good return on investment of your time.
I've heard of that midline thing before, and I'm not sure where I've heard it, but what is it about crossing the midline that, is it activating both sides of your brain to work as one? What is it doing?
It's doing exactly that. A lot of people are right or left-brained, and they get in the habit of, just using, and especially with a lot of the neurodiverse people that I work with, a lot of people with autism and ADHD tend to, be using only one side of the brain. So you're forcing the brain to the two sides of the brain to communicate with each other. And, it means that you're going to, immediately afterwards, you're using more of the brain. You're using 2 sides of your brain rather than just one. And so it gets that, communication going. So So it's helpful with that. When my kids were young, there was this thing that had come out called Brain Gym. And it's funny, my mother ended up being my son's temporary teacher for a semester when my son was about 8. And she got in the class, there were 8 neurodiverse kids, 8 children with ADHD, autism, other learning difficulties, and some really significant behavioral problems. So my mum had them doing 10 minutes of brain gym before every session in the morning. And I remember the principal of the school saying, I don't know what your mother's doing. This class of unruly children were just so much calmer. And, you know, they were doing better in their classes, and they were doing better in testing, and they were better behaved. And so it's, you know, I'd forgotten about that until you just mentioned it. It's can be really powerful.
Yeah. For parents of neurodivergent children, how do you coach a parent, or what can a parent do to better support their child, or even understand their child better? Just because, you know, the parent, my brain doesn't think necessarily like my child's brain. So whatever I think works for me, how I learned reading, how I learned math, how I learned things, if I try and teach it that same way to that child, it's harder. It doesn't really work.
Absolutely. The first thing I'll say when I'm working with a parent of a child with additional needs or neurodiversity is that it's hard. It's hard being a parent anyway. It's like, you know, you get delivered this small being that is completely reliant on you, and they don't come with a manual, and they're probably not what you expect. So being a parent is hard anyway. And then when your child has additional needs, it's even harder. And really interestingly, the research that researcher talked about earlier on PTSD, the second most studied population, the first is veterans, war veterans, and the second is parents of children with autism, because it can be like living in a war zone all the time. You have a child whose behavior can change in an instant, and they can have like a 2 or 3 hour tantrum, or, you know, they're a child who's really struggling. So the first thing I say to parents is it's hard, and, you know, and you just have to focus on doing your best. So many parents of neurodivergent children come to me and they have a lot of guilt about how they've parented. And I always say to them, you have done your best under very difficult circumstances, and you need to give yourself some grace. Because that kind of guilt and regret and looking back and saying, I wish why did I not do it differently? It doesn't help your child today or going forward. So, you know, like we said earlier, focus on what you can control. So that's kind of, you know, that's one of the things that I always coach on. And the other thing, like you mentioned, I always explain to them about brain differences, you know, and I say to people, you have a completely unique brain. There has never been a person in the world before that has a brain just like yours, and there never will be. And it's because, you know, there's billions of ways to wire a brain. And so everybody is different.
Yeah.
And, you know, accepting that difference and accepting that different brains need different things in order to thrive is, you know, is a really important place to come from. And like we talked about earlier with stress, if something is stressing a child, whether you understand it or not as a parent, it is stressing them. And that is real to them, and you have to take it seriously. And, you know, it was funny, I was just watching a video earlier of an autistic adult who had gone to see a doctor who said, you're not autistic because labels on clothing don't bother you. And the doctor had asked her, do labels on clothing bother you? He hadn't asked the follow-up question of, do you have labels in your clothing? And she said, As a young child, I realized that labels bothered me. So for like 20 years, I haven't had any clothing with labels in it. So she gave an honest answer. Labels in clothing don't bother her.
Because she doesn't have it.
Because she doesn't have them. And, and she has all these other sensory issues, but the doctor didn't ask about them. So, they completely missed the point. I've completely lost my train of thought. This is the problem with having ADHD. My brain is like, going off in all different directions.
Yeah. I guess just general tips for,
Yeah.
I think we were talking about tips on how parents with neurodivergent children, how you might coach them.
And I also always have a session with them about brain health and saying, your child has a brain that is struggling to thrive in this world in which we live. And if you can get their brain as healthy as can be, get them on a diet that really suits them. And a lot of kids with autism and ADHD are really sensitive to food. And, I've worked with a ton of kids with ADHD, and they just have to look at a piece of candy and they go wild. They cannot have sugar. They cannot have food coloring. And I used to, when I was a developmental pediatrician, I would see, and also when I did neurofeedback, I would see it in the kids. You could see, like, I'd be like, what is wrong? What's happened? This is a different child to the child I saw last time. And the parent would be like, his grandparents took him for McDonald's last night, or he had a bag of candy on the way over because we didn't have time to get breakfast. And that food that their brain couldn't tolerate was making their brain malfunction.
Yeah, I even me, like if I eat sugar, I notice the difference in my mood or my performance as well. Like I totally notice that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the top, when I'm coaching parents of neurodiverse kids, top 5 things: diet, exercise. Kids are meant to be moving a lot. The younger they are, the more they're meant to be moving. And we often sit them in a classroom for 6 hours a day and wonder why they're misbehaving. It's like they are not moving enough. They need to be moving. The next thing is teaching emotional regulation and stress management. You've got to teach your kids tools to calm themselves, whether it be, mindfulness practice or doing some jumping jacks or, dancing to a favorite song. It doesn't matter. Just find things that help them manage their stress and monitor their emotions. The next thing is with kids is social. We are social creatures, but neurodiverse kids are extremely sensitive to negative social influence. And there's a term that's kind of going around a lot at the moment, which is rejection sensitivity disorder, and it's used kind of in the ADHD world. And by the time somebody reaches adulthood and they have, a high level of ADHD, they have been criticized almost every day of their life, harshly criticized for who they are, told that, what's wrong with you? Why can't you sit still? Why did you do badly in that exam? Why did you play with that girl's hair? Or, like all of these things that they get criticized for. And what happens is it makes them very sensitive to any comment or behavior that their brain perceives as rejection or criticism. And so a lot of adults are super sensitive. You have to be like really careful what you say to them. And it can lead to them having relationship problems because, nobody's got a perfect partner. Our partners sometimes say the wrong thing or pull the wrong face when you say something to them. And if you are constantly feeling that is them rejecting you, it's going to be really hard to form a positive relationship. And the final thing, so I said there were 5 things: diet, exercise, stress management, social. And the final thing is sleep. And it's actually kind of in the top 3, because when we sleep, lots of really good things happen in our brain. And the thing that I love the most is, for a long time, the scientists couldn't figure out how the brain cleans itself. because it doesn't, the rest of the body has something called the lymphatic system, which flushes out toxins. The brain doesn't have that. And they're like, how does the brain clean itself? It turns out when you're in deep and REM sleep, little channels open up alongside the blood vessels in your brain that are the lymphatic system for the brain. It's called the glymphatic system. It is effectively like a cleaning and tidying crew coming into your brain while you sleep. It gets rid of all the toxins. It puts all the neurochemicals back where they're meant to be. It kind of tidies, cleans, flushes out, polishes the brain ready for the next day. And so if you're not getting good enough quality and quantity of sleep, that process is not happening and your brain will become inflamed.
That makes so much sense, and that helps explain the brain fog. If,
Yes.
after not having enough sleep or staying up all night, that makes so much sense. Well, Leonora, this has been a fascinating conversation. How can people get in touch with you? What's the best way to get in touch with you if people want to learn more or connect with you?
Yes. So I have a funny spelling of my name. Mother, she gave me a unique name. So my website is drleonaurarhodes.com. So you can kind of, that's my kind of central hub for like everything I do. I am very active on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So wherever your favorite, the only thing I don't do is the that begins with an X. Don't do that one.
Okay.
So whatever your favorite place to hang out on in social media land is, you can probably find me there.
Well, great. Well, thanks you so much for talking with me today, Leonora.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on.